Every night at 2 a.m., I heard footsteps above my ceiling. I thought grief was haunting me, but it wasn't grief at all. It was the truth trying to escape. When my husband Daniel and I bought the old Foster house on the edge of Willow Creek, everyone in town warned us. "That place has a pulse of its own," one neighbor said, shaking his head like an omen. But Daniel only laughed, saying that old houses have memories, and maybe that's what makes them feel alive. I tried to believe him. After all, I was the one desperate to start over, to leave behind the unbearable quiet that followed my mother's passing and the decades of not knowing what happened to my sister Clara. She had vanished one summer night when she was 16, and I was 21. The sheriff said she probably ran away, but I knew my sister. She wouldn't have left without her diary, and she wouldn't have left without me. The Foster house was massive, peeling yellow paint, wide porch, ancient trees that leaned toward the roof like old friends whispering secrets. Daniel said it was perfect for writing. I remember the first time sunlight streamed through the dusty kitchen window. I thought it felt like hope, like something could finally begin again. But the first night we slept there, something strange happened. At exactly 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of soft thuds above the ceiling. They weren't the random creaks of an old home. They were footsteps, slow, deliberate, human. I held my breath, waiting for them to stop. Daniel didn't stir. When I whispered his name, the sound vanished, as if whoever or whatever it was had frozen, listening back. The next morning, Daniel said it must have been rats, or wood expanding, or maybe the wind. He smiled like I was a child frightened by a storm. But the following night, the sound returned, again at 2 a.m. And this time it was louder, closer, almost rhythmic. I climbed out of bed, my heart pounding so loud it drowned the clock. I grabbed the flashlight, tiptoed into the hallway, and looked up. The attic hatch above the staircase was slightly ajar. A thin ribbon of cold air touched my face. Then came a sound like someone exhaling, steady, slow, almost human. I froze until Daniel appeared behind me, bleary-eyed. He laughed softly, said, "You've been reading too many ghost stories," and pulled me back to bed. But I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the ceiling, tracing every shadow, every sound, wondering what kind of house breathes at night. The next morning, I hired a local cleaner named Margaret to help me unpack. She was in her 60s, kind eyes, rough hands, and a voice that carried the weight of knowing things she didn't say. "This place feels heavy," she murmured as she dusted the hallway railing. "Old houses remember, you know." When she passed beneath the attic door, she stopped, tilting her head. "Don't open that hatch, Mrs. Bennet," she whispered. "Some things up there aren't meant to be disturbed." I laughed politely, but she didn't. Her eyes were serious, almost fearful. After she left, the house felt emptier than before. Over the next weeks, small things began to vanish. A mug, my blue sweater, a loaf of bread left untouched on the counter. Daniel teased that I was getting forgetful. But one morning, I found the attic door cracked open again, and in the dust beneath it were footprints. Small, bare, undeniably human. My stomach dropped. I called Daniel at work, my voice shaking. "There's someone in the attic," I said. He sighed, distracted, said he'd check it out later. But that night he came home late, smelling of whiskey and ink. When I brought it up, he snapped, "Stop it, Nora. You're letting your imagination ruin this house." His anger stunned me, not because he raised his voice, but because there was something else in it. Fear. That night, I dreamed of Clara. She stood at the top of a staircase, her hair longer, her dress torn. She whispered something I couldn't hear, then turned and disappeared into the darkness. When I woke, my pillow was wet with tears. I walked into the kitchen for water and froze. A piece of paper lay on the floor near the door, as if slipped through the crack. On it, In faded pencil were 3 words. She never left. My hands trembled as I read it again and again. The handwriting was shaky, unfamiliar, yet strangely feminine. When Daniel saw it, his face went white. He snatched it, tore it into pieces, and said, "Someone's playing a prank. Forget it." Then he stormed out, leaving his coffee untouched and his typewriter humming alone in the study. But I couldn't forget. That night, when the clock struck 2, I decided to find out the truth myself. I went to the garage, grabbed the old wooden ladder, and dragged it under the attic hatch. The smell hit me the moment I climbed halfway. Damp. Wood, mold, and something metallic like rust or dried blood. My flashlight flickered as I pushed open the hatch and pulled myself inside. The air was cold, heavy, almost still. I swept the light across the room. Dust floated like tiny stars. In the corner, I saw a chair, a folded blanket, a pair of shoes too small to be Daniel's. My heart raced. On the far wall, black marks spread across the wood, writing. Dozens of words scrawled in charcoal. Truth doesn't die. It waits. The beam of my flashlight trembled in my hand. I turned, and then I heard it. A cough, soft and dry, followed by a faint rustle. My throat went tight. The sound came from behind an old trunk in the corner. Slowly, I stepped closer. "Is someone there?" I whispered. No answer, only the sound of breathing. I took one more step. The floor creaked beneath me, and suddenly a shadow moved. A shape rose from behind the trunk. My flashlight caught a face, pale skin, sunken cheeks, tangled hair streaked with gray. My heart stopped. The woman blinked against the light, her eyes wide, frightened, familiar in a way that made my knees weaken. I dropped the flashlight and its beam rolled across the floor, landing on her bare feet, on the hem of her tattered dress, on the tiny locket hanging from her neck, the same one I'd given Clara the summer before she vanished. My breath came in short, broken gasps. "Clara?" I whispered. The woman flinched, then took one step forward, her voice cracking like an old door opening. "Nora," she said. And in that one word, every year of silence, every night of grief, every unanswered prayer came crashing back to life. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The world around me blurred. The dust, the wooden beams, the broken boxes, all fading into the background as I stared at the woman standing before me. Her face was hollow, pale as paper, her hair silver, and tangled. But behind those tired eyes was something I recognized instantly. It was the same light, the same quiet mischief my sister Clara once had when we used to sneak out to catch fireflies behind our mother's house. My lips trembled. "You're alive," I whispered, barely hearing my own voice. "How are you alive?" Clara blinked, as if the question itself hurt. Then she sank down onto the old chair, her bones sharp beneath the thin fabric of her dress. "I wasn't supposed to be," she said softly. "He said it was better this way." My heart lurched. "Who said that?" "Clara, who?" She lifted, her eyes slowly, and for a moment, the air in the attic thickened, almost humming. "Daniel," she said. "Your husband." The word didn't make sense. My husband? Daniel, the man who'd held me through grief, who wrote words about redemption and mercy, who said he'd dedicate every book to me. How could he be the same man who'd hidden my sister in an attic? "No," I said, shaking my head. "That's not possible." But Clara only looked down, her hands trembling as she clutched the hem of her dress. "He told me you'd never forgive me," she whispered. "He told me I'd ruined everything." Her voice cracked, and I could see the weight of years pressing down on her shoulders. I wanted to reach for her, to hold her, but fear rooted me where I stood. "What did he mean? What happened?" I asked. She looked at me with hollow eyes. Do you remember the night I disappeared? The summer fair? The music and the fireworks? I nodded, my throat tightening. That night had replayed in my mind every day for 3 decades. She closed her eyes, her voice trembling. I went to see him, Nora. I didn't mean to. He was drunk that night, angry about something. He said he'd read my poems and thought they were brilliant. He promised to help me publish them, but when I told him I wasn't ready, that I wanted to go home, he changed. He said he could make me famous if I did what he wanted. I tried to leave. He grabbed my arm. I pushed him. He fell, hit his head. There was blood everywhere. She stopped, her breathing uneven. I thought he was dead, she continued. I panicked. I ran. But he woke up. He told me if anyone found out, they'd blame me. He said if I stayed quiet, he'd fix everything, that he'd protect me. My hands shook. And you believed him? She gave a weak, broken laugh. I was 16, Nora. He was older, powerful, and I was terrified. He told me you'd already moved away, that you'd started a new life, that you didn't want to see me again. He said I'd destroy you if I came back. Her words pierced through me like shards of glass. I remembered Daniel's first book, The Girl in the Attic. It was about a writer haunted by a lost sister. I'd thought it was fiction, a product of his brilliant mind. But now I saw every sentence for what it was, a confession hiding in plain sight. Clara, I whispered, how long have you been here? She looked toward the small window at the corner of the attic, its glass clouded with dust. Since that night, she said simply. He kept me here, brought me food, blankets, sometimes new notebooks. He said it was temporary, that one day the world would know my words. But every year he said it wasn't time yet. Her eyes glistened. He used my poems, Nora. He took my words, my stories. Every line I wrote while trapped up here, he copied them. He said he'd share them with the world for both of us. But when his first novel came out, my name wasn't there. Only his. I felt dizzy. The room seemed to tilt. You mean the books? His books? They're mine, she said. My pain, my words, my name erased. I wanted to scream, to run, to destroy something, anything, but I could barely stand. He told me he loved me, I muttered, half to myself. He said the stories came to him in dreams. Clara looked at me with such sadness it made my chest ache. He does love you, Nora, in his own way. That's why he lied. He said if the world found out what happened, you'd lose everything. He said your life depended on his silence and on mine. She reached out a trembling hand, touching my face gently, her skin cold and dry. He thought he was saving you, but he was really saving himself. Downstairs, the sound of a car door slammed. Clara's eyes widened. He's here, she whispered. My stomach clenched. You can't be seen, she said. If he finds out you know, he'll make you disappear too. I shook my head, refusing to believe, but her fear was real, deep, raw, desperate. The floorboards creaked below. Daniel's voice echoed faintly up the stairs. Nora? His tone was calm, controlled, but there was something sharp underneath. What are you doing up there? I pressed my finger to my lips, signaling Clara to stay silent. I climbed halfway down the ladder, forcing a smile I didn't feel. Just cleaning, I called out. There's dust everywhere. He stepped into view at the bottom of the stairs, his shadow stretching long across the wall. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It's late, he said. You shouldn't be up there. His gaze drifted upward, lingering just a second too long on the open hatch. Something cold and electric passed between us. He knew. Somehow he knew I'd seen something. Go to bed, Nora, he said quietly. I'll handle the attic tomorrow. I nodded, climbing down slowly, my knees shaking. When I looked back up, Clara was gone, swallowed by the darkness. I could hear her faint breathing above, shallow and fast. Daniel took my hand as we walked toward the bedroom. His fingers were cold, his grip too tight. You look pale, he murmured. Did you see something? I shook my head. Just dust, I said. And old memories. He studied my face, then smiled again, softer this time. "You've always had an imagination," he whispered. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling that separated me from my sister. I could hear faint movements above, soft, cautious, almost apologetic. I wanted to cry out, to tell her I'd get her out, but Daniel stirred beside me and I bit my tongue until it bled. Around 3 a.m., I heard the attic hatch creak again. I rose quietly barefoot and peered into the hallway. The faintest light flickered from the ceiling like a candle flame. Then footsteps, 2 sets. One heavier, one light. I froze, realizing with terror that Daniel was already up there. I didn't breathe, didn't move. The silence stretched like a blade. Then Daniel's voice came low and cold. "You shouldn't have stayed, Clara." My heart stopped. I pressed my hands against my mouth, holding back a scream. Upstairs, something fell. A thud, a gasp, and then nothing. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the thin curtains, but it did nothing to calm the dread curling in my stomach. I barely slept after what happened in the attic. The feeling of someone breathing close, the flash of movement, the whispered hum that didn't sound human. I made 2 cups of coffee out of habit, even though Stephen hadn't been home in months, and sat at the kitchen table staring at the dark liquid until it went cold. Caroline arrived earlier than usual, carrying a paper bag of muffins and wearing that too bright smile that always felt like a mask. "Rough night?" she asked, setting the bag on the counter. I hesitated, debating how much to tell her. "Something's wrong up there," I finally said, my voice lower than a whisper. She froze, just for a second, and that single flicker of fear across her face told me everything. I wasn't imagining it. "Maybe it's squirrels," she said too quickly, reaching for a cloth to wipe the counter that didn't need cleaning. I noticed her hand shaking. "Or raccoons. Old houses make noises." I wanted to believe her, but deep down I knew she was lying. By afternoon, I couldn't sit still. I needed answers. I grabbed a flashlight, climbed back up the narrow steps to the attic, and tried to steady my breathing. The smell was worse than before, a mix of damp wood, old fabric, and something metallic. When I shone the light toward the corner, something glinted. A metal box sat beneath a pile of yellowed newspapers. I brushed off the dust and opened it. Inside were letters tied with a frayed ribbon, their paper soft with age. The top one was addressed to Mr. Samuel Reed. My heart stopped. That was Stephen's grandfather's name, the man who built this house in the 50s. I unfolded one letter, careful not to tear it. "I can't forgive what you did. You said she'd never find out. But she always does, Sam. She always does." The signature at the bottom was smeared. Unreadable, but the words sent a chill racing down my spine. As I read, a faint noise came from behind the old wardrobe, a scrape, then a shuffle. I froze, flashlight trembling in my hand. "Who's there?" I called, but my voice cracked. Silence. I took a step closer, each board creaking under my feet. The air grew colder. My hand brushed against the wardrobe's handle, and before I could pull it open, a soft sob came from inside. I stumbled back, heart pounding. "It's okay," I whispered, unsure who I was talking to. The sobbing stopped, and for a moment I thought I'd imagined it. Then the door creaked open by itself. Inside was nothing but an old coat and a cracked mirror propped against the wall. My reflection looked pale and hollow, but something about it felt wrong. The mirror shimmered faintly, like light rippling through water. And then, just for a heartbeat, another woman's face appeared behind mine, eyes dark, expression hollow, lips trembling as if she were trying to speak. I screamed and dropped the flashlight. When I picked it up again, the face was gone. I backed down the stairs, hands shaking, breath short. Caroline appeared at the bottom, wide-eyed. "What happened?" she asked. I told her what I saw, expecting her to laugh or dismiss it, but she didn't. Instead, she looked terrified. "Mrs. Reed," she said, voice trembling. "I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, but someone died up there." The room tilted. "What do you mean?" I asked. Caroline wrung her hands. "The previous owner's wife. The neighbors said she never left the house after her husband disappeared. They found her one winter morning up in the attic. Hanging from a beam, my stomach twisted. Why didn't you tell me sooner? She looked down. Because I thought if I ignored it, it would go away. But now you've stirred it up. That night, I couldn't stay still. Every shadow felt alive. I sat by the window, staring at the moonlight cutting through the trees, when I saw something move in the yard. A woman, barefoot, wearing a pale nightgown, her hair tangled, was standing near the garden fence, looking up at the attic window. My throat tightened. She looked exactly like the face in the mirror. "Stephen?" I whispered, though I knew he wasn't there. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, but when I looked again, she was gone. I rushed outside barefoot, my breath misting in the cold air, and saw only footprints in the dirt leading toward the woods. I followed them until they faded, swallowed by the darkness. When I came back inside, Caroline was waiting at the door. "You shouldn't follow her," she said softly. "Who is she?" I asked. Caroline's voice dropped. Her name was Margaret Reed, Samuel's wife. The name hit me like a blow. Stephen's grandmother? She nodded. Some say she went mad after he left, but others, they say she never left at all. I sat in silence long after Caroline went home, the house groaning in the wind. I could feel her presence now, Margaret, watching from corners I couldn't see, waiting for something. Maybe for me to leave, maybe for me to listen. When the clock struck midnight, a soft lullaby drifted from the attic, the same one I'd heard as a child when my mother used to sing me to sleep. Only this time the voice was hoarse, broken, and unbearably sad. I walked to the foot of the stairs, tears burning my eyes. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. The music stopped. A single word floated down the stairwell, carried on the air like a sigh. Truth. That night, I realized the house wasn't haunted by vengeance. It was haunted by secrets. And whatever Margaret wanted me to uncover, it was buried deep within the Reed family history. Something Stephen never told me. Something worth dying, or killing, for. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Margaret's face behind mine, those hollow eyes silently pleading. The word truth echoed in my head until it became unbearable. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. I was going to find out what she wanted me to see. When Caroline arrived, she tried to talk me out of it. "You don't understand," she said, clutching her rosary. "Some things shouldn't be uncovered." But I'd already spent too many nights in fear. "Whatever's been buried in this house," I told her, "it's eating us alive. I can feel it." She stared at me, her eyes full of pity, then finally sighed. "If you're going to do this," she said quietly, "you'll need to look beneath the floorboards." "That's where they said he hid it," I asked, heart pounding. She didn't answer. She just turned away and began scrubbing the counter like her life depended on it. The silence stretched so long it felt suffocating. "Caroline," I whispered, "what did he hide?" Her hands froze mid-motion. "Evidence," she finally said, barely above a whisper. "Of what happened to Margaret." After she left, I went to the attic again. The air felt thicker, heavier, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Dust motes drifted like slow snow in the light from the single window. I knelt near the corner where the box of letters had been, tracing my fingers along the warped wood. One board sounded different when I tapped it, hollow. I grabbed a crowbar from the tool chest and wedged it under the edge. The board creaked, groaned, and finally gave way with a sharp crack. Beneath it was a small wooden compartment wrapped in layers of cloth. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it echoing through my ears. I pulled out the bundle and unwrapped it. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages stained with time and something darker, rust or maybe dried blood. The first entry was dated June 14th, 1954. The handwriting was neat but desperate, the letters slanted as if written by someone trembling. He thinks I don't know, but I've seen her. The woman with the red hair. He brings her here when I'm gone. The neighbors whisper. I can feel them judging. He promised me this house would be our home, but it's become a cage. I turned the page. Last night I followed him. I saw them in the study. She was laughing. I wanted to scream. Instead, I waited until she left. Then I asked him why. He said I was imagining things, He said I was sick. But I'm not sick. I'm awake. As I read, the edges of the page crumbled under my fingers. My throat tightened. Margaret's pain was raw, bleeding through the ink. I flipped to the final entry. The writing was uneven, frantic. He said he'd leave me if I told anyone. He said no one would believe me. I told him the truth always finds its way out. He laughed. Tonight, I'll make him see what truth looks like. The last word trailed off into a streak of ink. No signature. Just emptiness. I stared at it for a long moment, feeling the weight of her despair pressing on me. Then something strange happened. The faint scent of lavender filled the air, and I heard a soft whisper, almost like a sigh. You found it. I turned, heart hammering, but there was no one there. Only the curtains swaying slightly though the window was closed. I clutched the journal to my chest and ran downstairs. My hands shook as I flipped through the rest of the pages, searching for clues. On one page, tucked between two entries, was a folded photograph. It showed a young woman, Margaret, smiling beside a man in a suit who looked hauntingly like Stephen. Only it wasn't him. It was Samuel, his grandfather. Behind them stood a woman with long red hair, half turned away from the camera. My stomach dropped. She looked exactly like Caroline. That couldn't be possible. Caroline was in her 40s. This picture was 70 years old. But the resemblance was undeniable. The same sharp cheekbones, the same piercing eyes. I grabbed my phone, scrolled through the photos I'd taken recently, and compared them side by side. They could have been twins. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I stormed into the kitchen where Caroline was wiping her hands on a towel. "Who are you?" I demanded. Her face went pale. "Emily, please," she said softly. "You don't understand what you found." "Then help me understand," I snapped. "Why do you look like her?" Caroline sank into a chair, her eyes glassy with tears. "Because she was my grandmother," she whispered. I grew up hearing the stories, the affair, the scandal, the death, but no one ever told the truth. My mother swore that Margaret didn't take her own life. She said Samuel made it look that way. I froze. "Are you saying he killed her?" Caroline nodded slowly. "And when he died, the truth died with him. Until now." Everything clicked into place, the haunting, the whispers, the sense of unfinished grief. Margaret wasn't angry. She was desperate to be heard. I looked down at the journal, then back at Caroline. "We have to show this to someone," I said. Caroline shook her head violently. "No, you don't know what kind of people are still tied to this house. The Reeds still have power in this town. If they think we're digging into their past..." She didn't finish. That night, the house grew restless. The walls creaked like voices murmuring. The lights flickered. In the hallway mirror, I saw faint handprints forming on the glass, one after another. "Margaret," I whispered. "What do you want me to do?" The mirror clouded, and for a moment, letters appeared through the fog. "Show him." Then they vanished. I didn't know what she meant until the next morning when Stephen called. His voice was distant, cautious. "I'm coming home," he said. "We need to talk." I froze, the phone cold in my hand. He hadn't been home in months, and now, after all this, he suddenly wanted to come back? "About what?" I asked. There was a pause. "About the house," he said. "And about my grandfather." The line went dead. I stood there shaking, the journal still open on the table. For the first time, I realized Margaret's ghost wasn't just haunting me, she was warning me. And whatever truth she wanted me to reveal, Stephen was part of it. When the clock struck midnight again, the same lullaby began to play, but this time it was louder, clearer, like a voice calling me to finish what she started. I whispered into the darkness, tears streaming down my face. "I'll find the truth, Margaret. I promise." Somewhere above me, a soft sigh echoed through the house. Grateful, sorrowful, and then everything went still. By the time Stephen's car pulled into the driveway, the sun had already dipped below the trees, painting the house in a dull amber glow that made the windows look like tired eyes. I stood by the porch, the journal clutched against my chest, my palms slick with sweat. I hadn't seen him in over 6 months. not since he'd left to clear his mind. Now, as he stepped out of the car, his face looked sharper, older, like he'd aged years instead of months. He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You look tired," he said softly, as if that explained everything. "So do you," I replied. We stood in silence for a long moment, the sound of cicadas filling the gap between us. Finally, I gestured toward the house. "We need to talk inside." His gaze lingered on me for a second before he nodded and followed. Once inside, he looked around like he was seeing it for the first time. "You've been keeping it clean," he said. "I remember when the walls used to be full of laughter." I swallowed hard. "That was before the house started talking back." He frowned. "What does that mean?" I dropped the journal on the table between us. "You tell me." He glanced at it, confused. "What is this?" "It belonged to your grandmother," I said. His expression changed instantly. Fear, guilt, maybe both. "Where did you find that?" "Under the floorboards in the attic. Right where she left it." He didn't move for a long time. Then, with a shaky hand, he opened it. His eyes darted over the pages, his breathing growing shallow. "You shouldn't have found this," he whispered. "Why?" I asked, my voice rising. "Because it tells the truth." "Because it exposes what your family did?" He looked up sharply, his face pale. "You don't understand," he said. "My grandfather was a complicated man. He loved her, but—" I slammed my hand on the table. "He killed her, Stephen!" The words came out louder than I meant, but I couldn't stop. She wrote it down. She knew about the affair. She knew everything. Stephen closed the book slowly, his hands trembling. "You think you know the truth because you read a few pages of an old diary?" He said bitterly. "You have no idea what she was like toward the end. She wasn't well." I shook my head, tears burning my eyes. "No, Stephen. She wasn't sick, she was trapped. And she's still here." He blinked, confusion flashing across his face. "Still here?" "What are you talking about?" "The attic. The mirror. The voice? She's been trying to tell us something." He stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. "You sound just like her," he muttered. That cut deeper than I expected. "Maybe I do," I said quietly. "Maybe that's why she came to me." For a moment, he looked like he wanted to argue, but then he sighed and rubbed his temples. "Fine," he said. "Show me." I led him upstairs. The attic door groaned open, releasing a wave of cold air that smelled faintly of lavender and dust. Stephen hesitated at the top step. "It's colder here," he murmured. "Always has been," I replied. I pointed to the spot where I'd found the journal. "She hid it here." He knelt down, running his fingers over the rough boards. "Grandfather used to come up here when I was little," he said softly. "He'd sit in that corner for hours, staring at nothing." "Maybe he wasn't staring at nothing," I said. The mirror still stood against the wall, covered in a thin sheet. I hesitated before pulling it down. The glass was cracked slightly in the corner, and my reflection looked distorted, as if someone else were standing just behind me. "Margaret," I whispered, my voice trembling. "He's here. Tell him what you told me." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the temperature dropped suddenly. The light flickered. Stephen took a step back. "Emily," he started, but then stopped. The mirror began to shimmer. Slowly, fog gathered across its surface, forming the faint outline of a woman's face. Pale, sorrowful, eyes full of grief. Stephen froze. "Grandma?" he whispered. His voice cracked on the last syllable. The figure in the mirror blinked once, then a faint whisper filled the air. "Truth." The word made him flinch. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head. "No," he said, shaking. "I didn't know." "I didn't what?" I cried. "Didn't know what your family did? Didn't know she was murdered?" He looked up at me with tear-streaked cheeks. "My grandfather told me she took her own life because she was unwell. But years later, I found out he lied. He confessed in a letter before he died. I burned it because I didn't want the world to see what kind of man he really was." The air in the attic seemed to hum with tension. "You protected a murderer," I whispered. He closed his eyes. "I protected my family name. And it destroyed me." The mirror suddenly cracked down the center with a loud snap. Both of us jumped back. A low wail filled the room, a sound of unbearable sorrow. "She's angry," I said. "She wants the truth out." Stephen's hands trembled. "Then we give it to her." We spent the next hour reading through the rest of the journal. Every page painted a clearer picture. The affair, the confrontation, the night Samuel struck her in a fit of rage, then staged her death to look like suicide. By the time we reached the end, Stephen's tears were falling freely. "I didn't want to believe it," he whispered. "But now I can't deny it." Downstairs, the wind howled through the chimney, rattling the shutters. "We have to make it right," I said. "We have to tell her story." Stephen nodded weakly. "We will." As we left the attic, the mirror shimmered one last time. Margaret's reflection stood there, faint but peaceful, her lips forming two words I barely caught. "Thank you." For the first time since moving into that house, I didn't feel fear. I felt purpose. But just as I reached the bottom of the stairs, the front door burst open. Caroline stood there, her face pale as ash. "You told him?" She shouted, eyes wide. "You showed him the journal?" "He had a right to know," I said, stepping forward. She shook her head violently. "You don't understand. Once the truth comes out, they'll come for us, too." Stephen frowned. "Who's they?" Caroline's voice trembled. "The people who helped Samuel cover it up." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating her terrified face. And in that instant, I realized Margaret's death was only part of the story. The real danger hadn't even begun yet. The moment Caroline said those words, the air seemed to leave the room. The silence was suffocating, thick with fear and disbelief. Stephen took a step toward her, confusion and anger flashing across his face. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "What people?" "My grandfather's been dead for decades." Caroline's lips trembled. "You think a man like Samuel Reed could cover up a murder alone?" "He had friends, powerful friends, judges, bankers, even the police chief. They all owed him favors. And when Margaret died, they made sure the story stayed buried." Her eyes darted to the window as if expecting someone to appear from the darkness outside. "Some of their families are still around. And if they find out you've uncovered this..." Her voice trailed off and she didn't need to finish. I already knew what she meant. Stephen shook his head, pacing. "That's insane. You can't honestly believe people would care about something that happened 70 years ago." Caroline turned sharply. "You have no idea how deep their loyalty runs. The Reeds built this town. Their money, their reputation, it all came from blood and lies. They'll do anything to protect it." The words hung between us like a noose. My heart pounded. "Then we expose them," I said. "We take this to the press, to the police, whoever will listen." Caroline's face went pale. "If you do that, they'll ruin you, Emily. They'll ruin both of you." I looked at Stephen. His jaw tightened, but there was fear in his eyes. "She's right," he said quietly. "You don't understand what they're capable of." I stared at him in disbelief. "So we just do nothing? We let Margaret's story die again?" He turned away, unable to meet my gaze. It's not that simple, but it was. At least to me. I had felt Margaret's sorrow, heard her cry for justice. I couldn't live with myself if I let her fade back into silence. "I'm not afraid of them," I said. "They can't haunt me worse than she already has." Caroline grabbed my arm. "You don't know what you're saying. Once you speak her name publicly, there's no going back." Stephen rubbed his temples, muttering something under his breath. Then he looked up, eyes haunted. "There's one person who might help," he said. "My father's old lawyer, Robert Grayson. He handled the estate after Samuel died. If anyone knows what really happened, it's him." Caroline shook her head. "Grayson's part of it. He was one of the men who signed the coroner's report declaring it suicide." Stephen's expression darkened. "Then maybe he's the one we need to confront." That night, sleep was impossible. The wind rattled the windows and the old house moaned as if remembering the horrors buried within its walls. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the journal resting on my nightstand. Margaret's words echoed in my mind. The truth always finds its way out. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate. Stephen was asleep beside me, so I knew it wasn't him. I held my breath as the floorboards creaked closer. The door handle turned slightly, then stopped. For a long, chilling moment, whoever or whatever was there just stood in silence. I could hear faint breathing. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The handle released and the footsteps retreated down the hall. I didn't move until morning. When I finally opened the door, there was a folded piece of paper on the floor. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Written in elegant cursive were 5 words. They know. Leave before dawn. I rushed to wake Stephen. Someone's been in the house, I cried, showing him the note. He frowned, running a hand through his hair. This is getting out of control. You think? I snapped. Someone's warning us, or threatening us. Caroline appeared at the doorway, her face ashen. I told you they'd find out. We packed in silence. Every sound in the house felt amplified. The ticking clock, the groan of the stairs, the whisper of wind through the cracked window. Before leaving, I took one last look at the attic door. I'm sorry, Margaret, I whispered. But I'll come back. I'll finish this. We drove to the next town over, to a motel that smelled faintly of cigarettes and old carpet. Stephen paced while I sat at the small table, the journal open in front of me. We can't run forever, I said. If what Caroline said is true, they'll come after us no matter where we go. Stephen stopped pacing and leaned against the wall, looking exhausted. You don't understand, Emily. My family's name is everything in this town. If this story comes out, it won't just destroy the Reeds, it'll destroy me too. His voice cracked on the last word. You're afraid of losing your name, I said softly. But Margaret lost her life. He didn't answer. Instead, he sat on the edge of the bed and buried his face in his hands. I can't believe this is happening, he murmured. My grandfather, my family, everything I thought I knew is a lie. I walked over, kneeling in front of him. Then let's make it right. Later that day, Stephen made a call. We're meeting Grayson tomorrow morning, he said when he hung up. He agreed to talk, but only at his office. He sounded nervous. The drive there the next morning was tense. The sun was barely up and mist hung low over the fields. When we arrived, Grayson's law office looked deserted, an old brick building with blinds drawn tight. Stephen knocked, no answer. He tried again, harder this time. Still nothing. Maybe he changed his mind, I said. Stephen reached for the doorknob. It turned easily. Inside, the air was cold and heavy with the smell of stale coffee. Papers were scattered across the floor. A single lamp flickered in the corner. And then we saw him. Robert Grayson sat slumped in his chair, head tilted at an unnatural angle, eyes wide open but empty. A dark stain spread across the front of his shirt. I gasped and stumbled back. Stephen rushed forward, checking for a pulse, but there was none. He's dead, he whispered. Oh God, he's dead. I noticed something in his hand, a small envelope clutched between his stiff fingers. Stephen pried it free. Inside was a single note written in shaky handwriting. Too late. They're watching you. The room spun. My knees buckled and Stephen caught me just before I fell. We have to leave, he said urgently. But I couldn't move. All I could think was that Margaret had been silenced once, and now the past was doing it again. As we stepped outside, I looked back at the office. For just a moment, I thought I saw a woman standing by the window, Margaret, her face sorrowful, her eyes pleading. And I understood. The truth wasn't finished with us yet, because the dead might rest. But the guilty never do. When I opened my eyes again, the world was silent except for the faint humming of the ceiling fan and the steady drip of rain outside. My head ached, but the memory of what I saw before I collapsed came rushing back. The girl on the attic floor, her trembling lips, the way she whispered my name as if she'd been waiting for me. For a moment, I wondered if I'd dreamt it. But when I sat up, I saw the folded blanket on the chair, the open window letting in cold air, and the small plate of food Caroline must have left. She was real. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from Caroline flashed across the screen. Mrs. Emily, please don't go up there again. It's not safe. She's scared but not dangerous. I'll explain tomorrow. My heart pounded at her words. She's scared? Not dangerous. What in the world was happening under my own roof? I typed back, my hands shaking. Who is she? But the message remained unread. I forced myself to get up and glance at the mirror. My face looked pale, drawn, and older than I remembered. I couldn't stay trapped between confusion and fear any longer. I needed answers. I went downstairs to the kitchen and noticed muddy footprints trailing from the back door to the pantry. My breath hitched. They were small, too small to belong to Caroline and definitely not mine. I followed them, every step echoing in the hollow quiet of the house. They led to the basement door. For years, I avoided that place. Stephen used it as storage for his old manuscripts and personal boxes, things he never wanted me to touch. But now the air felt different, heavy, like the house was holding its breath. I grabbed the flashlight from the counter and opened the door. A musty smell hit me, thick with dust and something metallic, faintly like rust. Or blood. As I descended the steps, the beam of light flickered across old furniture, covered frames, and boxes labeled with dates. My eyes stopped on one box in particular. Summer Project, 2014. I knelt down, heart pounding, and lifted the lid. Inside were sketches, journals, and dozens of photographs. Each one showed the same girl I'd seen upstairs, the same deep eyes, the same thin frame, but younger, maybe 13 or 14. In every picture, Stephen was beside her, smiling, writing something down. My hand trembled as I picked up a note written in Stephen's handwriting. Observation ongoing. Promising subject. Shows signs of regression, but emotional recall remains intact. My stomach twisted. Observation? Subject? What did that mean? Before I could think further, a soft sound drifted from behind the old furnace. A quiet sob, like someone trying not to be heard. I turned slowly, the flashlight shaking in my grip. Who's there? I whispered, my voice cracking. The sobbing stopped. Then, in the stillness, a faint voice answered, Please, don't send me back. I moved closer, my breath shallow. And there she was, the girl from the attic, curled up behind the furnace, knees pulled to her chest, clutching a small leather notebook. Her eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else too. A quiet recognition. You look just like her, she whispered. He said you would never come down here. My heart clenched. Like who? She looked confused for a moment, then whispered, Like my mother. I froze. Your what? The words felt unreal, impossible. But she nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Stephen said she left. He said she didn't want me. But I remember your voice from the tapes. You used to sing. The air went out of my lungs. Tapes? Singing? My mind scrambled for meaning. Could Stephen have... No, it couldn't be. Yet when I looked closer, the resemblance was undeniable. Her eyes, her chin, there was something hauntingly familiar. What's your name? I asked softly. Lila, she said, her voice trembling. My knees gave way, and I sank to the floor. Lila? The name echoed through me like an old melody I'd forgotten. I wanted to reach out, but she flinched back. I'm not supposed to talk to you, she whispered. He gets angry when I do. My voice barely rose above a whisper. Stephen? She nodded. He said you'd ruin everything. At that moment, something inside me shattered. Every lie, every missing hour, every half-truth about his research trips and creative studies snapped into place. Stephen hadn't been writing fiction. He'd been experimenting with her, with a child. But how could she think I was her mother? What had he told her? The air felt too thick to breathe. I heard my own voice tremble. Lila, you don't have to hide anymore. You're safe now. She shook her head violently. No, he'll come back. He always comes back when you're asleep. He said you forget on purpose. He said you... She stopped, clutching her head. It hurts when I try to remember. I reached for her hand. No one's going to hurt you again. Not him, not anyone. Before I could say more, I heard a creak above us, the sound of the front door opening. Heavy footsteps echoed through the floorboards. My blood ran cold. Stephen was home. I turned off the flashlight instantly and pulled Lila closer behind the furnace. My heart hammered so hard I was sure he could hear it from above. His voice carried down the stairs, calm, too calm. "Emily, are you awake?" Lila's grip tightened around my wrist. "Don't answer," she mouthed. He walked through the kitchen, the sound of his shoes deliberate, measured, like someone pacing before a speech. "I know you've been in the attic," he said quietly. "You shouldn't have gone there." I clutched Lila tighter, afraid even to breathe. Then came the sound of the basement door creaking open. The stairs groaned under his weight. Step by step, he descended into the dark, the dim light from above casting his shadow long across the floor. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about lies or betrayal anymore. Whatever Stephen had been hiding, it was darker, deeper, and far more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. The beam of his flashlight sliced through the darkness, sweeping across the room. I held my breath as it passed inches from where we hid. My mind raced for a plan, but every thought dissolved into panic. Then his voice, gentle, familiar, but colder than ice. "Emily," he whispered, "if you're down here, please understand, I did it all for you." My blood froze, because in that moment, I knew he meant every word. His voice sent a chill crawling up my spine, slow and deliberate, like a whisper from a place I didn't want to remember. "I did it all for you," he repeated, his flashlight beam sweeping through the shadows, cutting through the air like a knife. I tightened my grip on Lila's trembling hand, my pulse hammering in my ears so loudly I could barely think. He was only a few feet away now. I could smell the faint trace of his cologne, the same scent that used to comfort me at night but now made my stomach twist. I had to think fast. Lila's breathing was shallow, panicked. She looked like a trapped bird ready to bolt, and I knew one wrong move could give us away. I leaned closer to her ear and whispered, "Stay still. No matter what happens, don't move." She nodded weakly, tears glimmering in her eyes. Stephen's light passed over the furnace, over the boxes, and then paused. My heart dropped. He was staring directly at the one labeled Summer Project 2014. He knelt down, brushing dust from the lid, and opened it. I heard the rustle of papers, then his quiet sigh. "You shouldn't have found this," he said softly, almost mournful. "You weren't supposed to remember." That word, remember, hit me like thunder. My thoughts spun. Was he talking about me? About Lila? What was I not supposed to remember? He picked up one of the photos, the one where Lila looked about 13, and traced her face with his finger. "She was my second chance," he whispered. "You didn't understand then, Emily, but I had to do it. I had to save her." I felt rage boiling inside me, twisting with fear. Save her? He'd locked a child in our home, lied to me for years, and called it salvation. When he stood again, the beam of light suddenly turned toward the furnace, straight toward us. For a heartbeat, time froze. His eyes met mine, and I knew the mask he'd worn all these years had finally cracked. "Emily," he breathed, lowering the flashlight. "You shouldn't have come down here." Lila whimpered and pressed herself against me. I stood up slowly, shielding her behind my body. "Stephen," I said, my voice trembling but steady enough to carry. "What did you do? Who is she?" He didn't answer right away. He just stared at me with that same calm expression he used when explaining something he thought I was too fragile to understand. "She's yours," he said finally. "She's what you lost." The world tilted. I blinked, trying to process his words. "Mine?" He stepped closer, the light illuminating the sharp lines of his face. "You don't remember because I made you forget. After the accident, you couldn't handle it. You begged me to erase it all. The grief, the loss. So I did," my breath hitched. "What are you talking about?" "The crash," he said. "The one 10 years ago on the way to the lake house. You never wanted to talk about it, Emily. You said the memories were killing you. So I helped you start over. But I couldn't let her go. I found a way to bring her back." I shook my head violently. "You're lying." "That's impossible." He smiled faintly, almost sadly. "I know how it sounds. But I've spent years working on memory replication, psychological projection. I rebuilt her through what you left behind, through what she remembered. She's not a ghost, Emily. She's the memory we shared made real. No, I whispered, backing away. You didn't rebuild her. You stole her. You stole some poor girl's life and trapped her here because you couldn't let go. Lila clung to my arm, crying quietly. Please don't let him take me, she said. Stephen's eyes softened when he looked at her. Sweetheart, I told you, she's your mother. She just forgot. Stop! I screamed, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. You're sick, Stephen. You need help. For the first time, his calm cracked. His jaw tightened. Help? He hissed. You think I need help? I did what you couldn't. You mourned her for years, drowning in pills and empty pages. I brought her back. I gave us another chance. Lila buried her face against me, trembling. I wanted to run, to grab her and never look back, but he was blocking the stairs. I needed a plan, fast. Then I saw it, the small metal key hanging from his belt. The same one that had always opened the study, the one room he never let me enter. My instincts screamed that whatever answers I needed were in there. I forced my voice to stay calm. Stephen, I said softly, I believe you. But please, let's just go upstairs and talk. You're scaring her. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, he said. But you'll see. You'll understand why I did it. He reached out a hand to Lila. She recoiled instantly, clutching my sleeve tighter. I stepped between them, glaring at him. Don't touch her. Something dark flickered in his eyes. You always were stubborn, he muttered. That's why I had to do this without you. When he turned toward the stairs, I noticed his keychain swing loose. My mind raced. I waited until he was a few steps ahead, then grabbed Lila's hand and whispered, Run when I say go. As he climbed, the beam of his flashlight bounced across the walls. I lunged forward, yanking the key from his belt. He spun around, eyes wide, but I pushed Lila toward the open basement door. Run! We bolted through the hallway, my heart slamming against my ribs. I could hear him shouting behind us, his footsteps pounding closer. Lila darted toward the back of the house, and I followed, fumbling with the key in my shaking hands. We reached the study door. My pulse throbbed in my ears as I jammed the key into the lock. It turned with a click. We rushed inside and slammed the door shut behind us. I turned the lock just as his fist hit the other side, rattling the wood. Emily, he roared, don't do this! I pressed my back against the door, gasping for air. The room smelled of old paper and antiseptic. Computers hummed softly in the corner. On the desk were files, photographs, and a single recording device still blinking red. I hit play. Stephen's voice filled the room, calm and measured. Subject shows continued instability. Emotional projection consistent with maternal bond formation. Recommend full memory realignment protocol before exposure. My knees went weak. It wasn't a project. It was an experiment. On Lila, on me, maybe on both of us. I turned to Lila, who was staring at the walls covered in photos, pictures of her at different ages, all in this same house, always alone. Her voice broke when she asked, Did he make me up? I swallowed hard, fighting tears. No, I said, pulling her close. You're real. No matter what he did, you're real to me. From the other side of the door came Stephen's final warning, low and trembling. Emily, if you open that last file, you'll destroy everything we built. But as I turned toward the computer screen and saw a folder labeled Project Eden, Emily, Phase 2, I knew there was no turning back. Because this wasn't just about saving Lila anymore. It was about finding out what he'd done to me. My fingers hovered above the mouse, trembling as if the truth itself might burn through my skin. The folder's name, Project Eden, Emily, Phase 2, glowed faintly on the computer screen, pulsing like a heartbeat. Behind me, Stephen kept pounding on the study door, his voice rough and frantic now. Emily, stop! You don't understand what you're doing! But that was the thing. I didn't understand, and that ignorance had already cost too much. I clicked the folder open. Inside were dozens of video files, each labeled by date. The earliest one was from nearly 10 years ago, The time he said I'd been recovering from the accident. My breath caught in my throat as I clicked the first video. The screen flickered, then showed a grainy image of me, sitting in a hospital bed, pale, eyes vacant. Stephen's voice came from behind the camera. Session 1. Subject Emily shows severe dissociation, memory gaps following trauma. Objective: restore stability through guided reconstruction. Then, the me in the video spoke, her voice soft and detached. I can't see her anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I hear her cry. Stephen's voice replied calmly, That's why we'll start the process. You'll forget the pain. You'll start over. My heart felt like it was being squeezed. I remembered those days. Foggy, medicated. Him always telling me it was better not to remember. But seeing it recorded, clinical, stripped of love, it broke something inside me. Lila stood behind me, her small hand gripping the edge of the desk. That's you, she whispered. You looked so sad. I swallowed hard. He made me forget, I said. But he didn't take it away. He just buried it. Stephen's pounding grew louder. Emily, open this door right now. His voice cracked between fury and desperation. I clicked another file, unable to stop myself. In this one, Stephen was standing beside a small hospital crib. A child was there, Lila. She couldn't have been more than 3. Electrodes dotted her temples, tiny lights blinking as machines hummed. Stephen's voice calm and methodical again. Phase 1 complete. Memory transfer from maternal recordings initiated. The subject responds to auditory triggers, especially lullabies. The me in the video walked in then, but she looked wrong. Too calm, too empty. I leaned over the crib, brushing Lila's hair, humming softly the same song I used to sing to our daughter before the crash. My voice wavered on the recording, but it was unmistakably mine. Lila gasped. That song? You used to sing it to me upstairs. Tears filled my eyes. I didn't know why it felt so familiar, I whispered. I thought it was just a dream. Stephen's voice cut through the door again. Emily, please! That child isn't who you think she is. She's a reconstruction, just fragments of what we lost. You can't fix the past by clinging to it. His words sounded like poison now. I turned to the computer and found a final folder. Confidential. Do not open. My pulse raced as I double-clicked it. The screen showed a single document. Termination protocol. The first line read, If subject Emily achieves full recall, memory stability will collapse. Immediate neural override required to prevent cognitive failure. I stared at it horrified. It wasn't about saving me, it was about controlling me. About keeping me in his world, docile, believing his version of love. I wasn't healing. I was being rewritten. Suddenly the door splintered. Stephen burst inside, his face pale, sweat glistening on his forehead. His eyes darted to the monitor, and his whole body stiffened. Turn it off, he said, voice low, trembling. I stood up slowly, shielding Lila behind me. What did you do to me? He took a step forward. I saved you, Emily. You were broken. You begged me to make the pain stop. No, I said, shaking my head, tears spilling down my cheeks. You didn't save me. You erased me. You turned grief into your experiment. He reached toward me, desperation in every movement. You don't understand. If you remember everything, you'll lose her again. The process can't hold both realities. Lila peeked from behind me, whispering, What does he mean? I turned to her, trying to stay calm. It doesn't matter. We're leaving. Stephen's voice broke. You can't take her! She's not even real outside of this house. The moment you step beyond those walls, she'll disappear. The words hit me like a physical blow. You're lying. He shook his head, his expression raw, pleading. You think I wanted this? I built this home, every inch of it, to hold her memory. It's the only place she can exist. You take her out and everything, her laughter, her touch, will fade. You'll lose her forever. Lila's small voice trembled. Is that true? I couldn't answer. I didn't know. My mind was spinning, trapped between horror and disbelief. But when I looked at her, at the fear and innocence in her eyes, I knew one thing for certain. She was real enough to love. Stephen took another step forward. Don't make me lose you both again. I backed away, my hand brushing against the desk drawer. My fingers found a small metallic shape, a flash drive labeled Project Reset. I grabbed it and shoved it into my pocket. You already lost us, I said. He lunged forward. I screamed and pushed the chair in his path. It crashed to the floor, giving me just enough time to grab Lila's hand and sprint toward the hall. Stephen stumbled after us, shouting my name, but we were already running through the kitchen, past the broken memories of our life together, the photographs, the unfinished manuscripts, the lies. We burst through the back door into the cold rain. The wind whipped through my hair as I dragged Lila toward the woods behind the house. The mud sucked at our shoes, every step heavy with panic. Behind us, the light from the house flickered, and I could hear Stephen calling, his voice raw, breaking. Emily, please. You'll kill her! I didn't look back. We reached the old shed near the edge of the property. I shoved the door open and pulled Lila inside, slamming it shut behind us. My chest heaved with exhaustion. The rain pounded the tin roof like war drums. Lila clung to me, whispering, Am I going to disappear? I brushed her hair from her face and forced a trembling smile. No, sweetheart. You're not going anywhere. Not while I'm here. She nodded weakly, resting her head against my chest. I could feel her heartbeat, quick and fragile, and I thought, how could something so alive not be real? Outside, I could still hear Stephen's voice faintly, fading in the storm. You'll regret this, Emily. You'll regret remembering. I held Lila tighter, whispering into her hair, maybe, but I'd rather remember pain than live a lie. The night swallowed us whole, the storm roaring around the little shed, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel trapped by fear. I felt awake, but deep down, I also knew this wasn't over. Whatever Stephen had done, whatever he'd built, wasn't just inside that house. It was inside me, and the flash drive in my pocket pulsed with the one truth he never wanted me to find, the truth that maybe I was part of the experiment too. That morning by the river changed something deep inside Min. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man running away. He didn't feel like a son hiding behind excuses or guilt. Instead, he felt a quiet peace growing inside him, a peace that didn't come from everything being right, but from finally accepting that pain had to be faced, not buried. He remembered his father's words from long ago. Son, everyone falls. What matters isn't how to avoid falling, but how to stand up again afterward. Back then, those words meant little, but now, they echoed in his chest like a voice from heaven, steady and clear. That afternoon, Min returned to his father's old woodworking shop. The wooden door creaked when he pushed it open, the hinges groaning like old memories. The smell of sawdust, sweat, and varnish still lingered in the air, an aroma of unfinished dreams. Min stepped inside, running his hand over the workbenches and tools. Everything was still there, frozen in time. On one table lay his father's old chisel, the handle worn smooth by decades of use. Min picked it up, gripped it tightly, and before he knew it, tears began to fall. His voice trembled as he whispered, Dad, I'm sorry. I ran away for too long. From the doorway, Ngok watched quietly. She didn't interrupt. She simply walked forward and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. That simple touch said everything. It said, You're not alone anymore. They sat down together on the wooden floor as sunlight streamed through the cracks in the walls, forming soft golden lines across the room. Min began to talk, not holding anything back. He spoke of the years he'd wasted drowning his pain in alcohol, the sleepless nights, the shame, the regret. He spoke of dreams left behind and the crushing silence that had followed his father's passing. Ngok didn't speak. She just listened, really listened. Because sometimes, what a broken soul needs most isn't advice or correction, but the grace of being heard. When Min finally stopped, his eyes were red and his voice weak. Ngok took a breath and said softly, You know, forgiving others is easy, but forgiving yourself, that's the hardest part. I spent years trying to do it, but I realized if we keep punishing ourselves for yesterday, we'll never step into tomorrow. I don't think your father would want to see you living in chains like that. Her words hit him like a key unlocking a door that had been shut for too long. She was right. His father wouldn't want him stuck in the shadows of guilt. His father would want him to live, to keep building, to love again, to carry forward what mattered most. A soft wind blew through the window then, making the old curtains flutter. The sunlight shifted, warming the room in a way that felt almost sacred. Min smiled, a real, honest smile that hadn't appeared in years. As the afternoon faded into evening, Min started cleaning the workshop. He wiped the dust off the benches, gathered the old tools, and straightened the shelves. Gox joined him without a word. The only sounds were the sweep of the broom and the wind whispering outside. Yet in that silence, there was something sacred, understanding, healing, grace. When everything was in place, Min stood in the middle of the workshop, looked around, and said quietly, "You know, I think I want to bring this place back to life. Not for money, but for meaning. Maybe I'll teach the kids in the village how to work with wood. Maybe I'll just keep it alive so people remember what this place stood for." And Gox smiled. "Your father would be proud." That night, when the world fell silent, Min sat on the porch, gazing at the moon hanging above the trees. The soft silver light touched the earth, the leaves swayed gently in the breeze, and the night carried a calm that he hadn't felt in a very long time. He thought about his life, the mistakes, the loss, the roads that led nowhere. But this time the memories didn't crush him. For the first time, they felt like lessons instead of chains. Deep inside, something had awakened. Faith. Faith that no matter how far one falls, there's always a way back if you let God guide you. Gok came out with 2 cups of tea and handed him one. "You know," she said gently, "every new beginning is hard. But as long as we keep walking, God will show us the way." Min looked at her, then at the sky. "I think he already has," he said. They sat in silence, listening to the crickets and the wind through the bamboo grove. It was quiet but not empty. It was the kind of silence that heals, the kind that lets 2 people breathe in peace together. Min closed his eyes for a moment and whispered, "Thank you for giving me another chance." And in that still night, under the soft moonlight, he felt it, the unmistakable touch of grace. Because sometimes God doesn't need to perform miracles. Sometimes he just needs to reopen a heart that's been shut for far too long. The next morning, the smell of fresh coffee filled the small kitchen, mingling with the sound of birds singing outside. Min stood by the window, watching the sunlight pour through the trees like threads of gold. It had been years since he'd woken up feeling this alive. For so long, his mornings had been heavy, haunted by memories, by the echo of his father's disappointed voice, by the ache of regret. But today the world seemed softer, kinder. He turned to see Ngok humming as she poured coffee into 2 cups. She glanced up and smiled, and something about that simple moment felt like redemption. After breakfast, they walked to the market together. The villagers greeted Min warmly, though some seemed surprised to see him sober, clean-shaven and smiling. He hadn't realized how much he had disappeared from their lives. "Good to see you again, Min," one of the old men said, clapping his shoulder. "Your father used to talk about you all the time. He'd be glad to see you back." Min nodded, his throat tightening. It was strange how forgiveness could come not just from within, but through the gentle acceptance of others. When they returned home, Min spent the day clearing out the rest of his father's workshop. Every nail, every board, every piece of wood carried a story. Some pieces were cracked, others unfinished. He couldn't help but think about how life itself was like that. Imperfect, incomplete, yet still full of potential. As he worked, he found an old wooden box tucked beneath the bench. Inside was a stack of letters, tied together with a thin piece of rope. The handwriting was his father's. He sat down on the floor, heart-pounding, and opened the first letter. "Son," it began, "if you ever find these, it means I didn't get to tell you what I should have said sooner. I know I was hard on you. I thought I was teaching you strength, but maybe I only taught you fear. If I could do it again, I'd tell you that you don't have to be perfect to be loved. You just have to keep trying, Keep standing, keep believing. I hope you'll build something with your hands that outlives your pain. And when you do, I'll be there in spirit. Proud, always proud. Min's eyes blurred. His hands shook as he turned the pages. The letters continued, each one softer, more vulnerable than the last. His father had written about loneliness, about missing his wife, about watching Min struggle from a distance, not knowing how to reach him. I wanted to teach you resilience, one letter said. But maybe I should have taught you grace. Min read every word until the afternoon sun faded to gold. When he finished, he pressed the letters to his chest and whispered, I forgive you, Dad. And I forgive myself. Ngok walked in quietly and knelt beside him. When she saw the letters, she placed her hand over his and said softly, Sometimes love finds a way to reach us even after it's gone. Maybe this was your father's way of coming home. Min nodded, unable to speak. The tears that fell this time weren't heavy. They were cleansing. That night, Min couldn't sleep. The letters had stirred something in him, an urge, a calling. Around midnight, he went back to the workshop and turned on the small lamp. The light spread across the old workbench, illuminating the tools and the wood he'd gathered earlier. He picked up the chisel and began carving, his hands steady, his breath calm. Every movement felt like a prayer, a conversation between him and his father. The hours slipped away quietly. When dawn came, he stepped back and looked at what he had made. A simple wooden cross, smooth and shining in the early light. Ngok found him there, covered in sawdust but smiling like a man reborn. You've been up all night, she said gently. What is it? Min lifted the cross. It's a beginning, he said. I want to rebuild this workshop as a place of hope. Maybe for kids who lost their way like I did. Maybe for anyone who needs to remember that broken things can still become beautiful. Ngok's eyes filled with tears. That's the most beautiful thing you've ever said. In the following days, Min began repairing the roof, repainting the walls, and inviting the village children to come watch him work. Some were shy, some curious. He taught them how to hold a hammer, how to sand a piece of wood, how to see not what was broken, but what could be made new. He told them stories of his father, of mistakes and forgiveness, of faith and second chances. The workshop came alive again, not with noise, but with laughter and purpose. One evening, as the children left, Min stood at the doorway with Ngok, watching the sunset paint the sky in deep orange and violet. You know, he said quietly, I used to think I was cursed, that my failures defined me, but maybe every fall was just God's way of guiding me here. Ngok turned to him, smiling softly. Sometimes he breaks us, not to destroy us, but to rebuild us stronger. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and the faint echo of a hammer striking wood. For a moment, Min thought he heard his father's laughter in the distance, a warm, familiar sound that made him close his eyes and smile. That night, before sleeping, Min placed the wooden cross on the shelf above his bed. He whispered, Thank you, Lord, for not giving up on me. Thank you for sending light into my darkest places. And as he drifted into sleep, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not just peace, but purpose. For the first time, his heart no longer belonged to regret. It belonged to grace. Months passed, and the workshop that once smelled of dust and despair now carried the scent of new beginnings. The laughter of children echoed through the wooden walls, blending with the rhythmic sound of chisels and saws. Min stood near the window, watching a group of boys and girls carefully shaping pieces of wood into small crosses, animals, and boats. The same tools that once symbolized his father's harshness had become instruments of hope and restoration. It was no longer a workshop. It was a sanctuary, a place where broken people and broken dreams were made whole again. Every morning, Min would begin with a prayer. Not one of asking, but one of gratitude. Thank you, Lord, for another day to create, to forgive, to love, he whispered, feeling the soft warmth of sunlight touch his skin. He had learned that peace wasn't something you found at the end of a long journey. It was something you allowed to bloom inside you when you stopped running from your pain. Gok had stayed by his side through it all. Together, they organized small gatherings in the evenings, where people from the village came to share stories of faith and forgiveness. Some cried. Some just sat quietly, letting their hearts rest. Min would talk about his past, not to glorify the struggle, but to remind them that no one is too far gone for grace to find. "The scars we carry," he said one night, "aren't signs of defeat. They're proof that we survived. Proof that we were loved enough to be healed." The room had fallen silent, and tears had glistened in more than one pair of eyes. One morning, as Min swept the floor of the workshop, he found a small boy standing shyly at the door. The boy held a broken wooden toy in his hand. "Can you fix it?" the boy asked softly. Min smiled and knelt down. "Of course," he said. "Everything that's broken can be fixed if we're patient enough to try." The boy's eyes brightened, and he watched in awe as Min carefully glued the toy back together, sanding the edges until it looked as good as new. When the boy left, clutching his toy, Min realized that in fixing what was broken around him, he had also fixed something deep within himself. Later that week, Min walked to the old bridge near the river, the same place where he had once sat in despair. But this time the air felt different. The river glimmered under the afternoon sun, and the breeze carried a quiet joy. He remembered the man he used to be, angry, ashamed, lost. And then he remembered the moment everything began to change, the moment he stopped asking, "Why me?" and started asking, "What now?" That shift, he realized, was where healing had begun. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you, God, for every wound that led me back to you, for every dark road that pointed me toward light." Ngok joined him, handing him a small book she'd been writing. "What's this?" he asked. "It's your story," she said, smiling. "I thought people should hear it, not because it's perfect, but because it's real. You've lived through pain, and you found peace. People need to know that they can too." Min turned the pages and saw his own journey written in her gentle handwriting. The fall, the guilt, the forgiveness, the rebirth. His eyes watered as he said, "If my pain can give someone else hope, then maybe that's why I went through it." That night, under the soft glow of the lanterns, Min and Ngach shared the story with the community. It wasn't a tale of triumph. It was a testimony, a story of falling, breaking, and finding redemption in the arms of grace. People listened in silence. When Min finished, an old woman stood up with tears streaming down her cheeks. "Thank you," she said. "I thought God had forgotten me, but hearing your story reminds me he never left." Min smiled. "He never leaves," he said softly. "Even when we run, even when we hide. He waits, patiently, until we're ready to turn around." As the night deepened, the stars stretched across the sky like silver promises. Min looked up and felt something stir in his heart, a gentle nudge, a whisper of purpose. He knew that his story wasn't ending. It was only beginning again, in every person who found courage through his journey. He turned to the crowd and said, "If you're listening tonight, don't give up. No matter how broken you think you are, God can still use your story. Pain doesn't define you. What you do with it does. You are not your past mistakes. You are the testimony of how far grace can reach." The crowd erupted in soft applause, some smiling through tears. Gok reached for his hand and he held it tightly, feeling the warmth of shared redemption. In the following weeks, more people came. Some brought children, others came alone, seeking peace, forgiveness, and the strength to start again. Min never turned anyone away. Each person who walked through that door reminded him of himself, a little lost, a little afraid, but still holding on to a flicker of hope. And every night, as he closed the workshop, he'd whisper the same prayer. "Lord, thank you for not wasting my pain." Because in the end, Min had learned the most powerful truth of all, that our greatest wounds can become our greatest gifts when placed in God's hands. He had learned that healing isn't about forgetting what hurt you, it's about using that hurt to light someone else's way. So if you're watching this right now, don't scroll past it. Don't think your story is over just because you've been through darkness. Every scar, Every tear, every failure, it all becomes part of the masterpiece God is painting through your life. Let His grace in. Let it rewrite your story the way it did for Min. And if this story touched you, if it reminded you that hope still lives even in the darkest places, then please, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Not just to support it, but to keep walking this journey of faith together. Because every story shared here is a reminder that no one is too broken for God to heal, no heart is too far gone to be found, and no ending is beyond redemption. Listen, and believe again. Because sometimes the next story might just be the one that changes your life forever.